What is up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and since it is officially 2023, I hope that everybody had a happy holidays and a lovely new year. Hopefully you're sticking with your New Year's resolutions. I know I made a couple myself. It's only been a few days, so hopefully everybody's good to go with those. But since it is the start of a new year, I wanted to put a bow on 2022 by ranking all of the video games that I played this year. So without further ado, let's rock. All right, a few things before we get started. These games are just the games that were released in 2022 that I played. I didn't want this video to be 10 hours long, so I couldn't include every game that I played. I wanted to limit myself to just the games that were released in 2022. That being said, I did throw in a couple of DLCs and the next gen update of Witcher 3 that I'm currently playing. I know that's kind of cheating because that game didn't come out in 2022, but it's my video and I wanted to talk about it, so we're going to talk about it. Also, I ordered these games in the order that they were released. I feel like logistically that's the easiest way to do it. And lastly, of course, these are just my opinions. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below, but let's just keep it civil. We're all just kind of hanging out talking about video games because we love video games. Just because I rated a game higher or lower than you wanted me to doesn't mean that my opinion is any more valid than yours, just like your opinion isn't any more valid than somebody else's. So let's just keep it civil. So the first game I want to talk about is Pokemon Legends Arceus, which I was super psyched for this game. I know some people were billing it as Pokemon's Breath of the Wild, and if that's what you wanted from this game, you were ultimately disappointed because that's not necessarily what it ended up being. However, I did like it as kind of a step forward for the Pokemon games. I'm a huge fan, but the games were becoming very stale. It was just the same game over and over again. It almost kind of felt like it was becoming like a Madden or just like those sports games that you get year after year, and it's the same thing over and over again, just in a different package. And so I'm glad that they were at least trying to make the games different, because it doesn't seem like, at least up until this point, that Pokemon really wanted to mature with its audience. It felt like they were always trying to grip a new generation into Pokemon, but they didn't seem to like want to mature with its already established audience. And so this was the first game where I felt like they were taking that step forward. It's not perfect. It's not a true open world game, which I wanted, which we will get to Pokemon Violet later in this video. But there were things in here that I thought were pretty cool and different for Pokemon games. It's not the best looking game, but again, we'll get to Pokemon Violet later. It's certainly better looking than that game was. And the story, while I don't really play Pokemon games for the story, I will say Arceus was batshit crazy. Kind of in a good way. I did enjoy it, some parts at least, but I didn't really relate to the story at all. So that was kind of a bummer. But again, I don't really play the Pokemon games for the story. All in all, it was a cool game. And again, it was a nice step forward for the franchise. So ultimately, I think I will end up giving Pokemon Legends Arceus a B. Kind of a high B though. It would be in the B+ territory if I was gonna break it down even more. So it's a fairly good score, especially considering it's the first real attempt at making a open world Pokemon game. So the next game that I want to talk about is Horizon Forbidden West, which I think, and I mentioned this in my video where I voted for all of the Game Awards nominees. I mentioned this, that I feel like this one just kind of got the short end of the stick because of the game that we're going to talk about next. Elden Ring definitely overshadowed. That game just took over the space, the gaming space, and just everybody was talking about that game. And I feel like more people would have talked about this game because it's a really good game. It is a really solid sequel. It looks phenomenal, and it's a great open world game. It's really fun to play. The only issue I had was it didn't feel like it did enough to make it different than Horizon Zero Dawn. It just kind of felt like a continuation of that game, which is fine. The story's great in the first game, the story's great in this game. However, with sequels, I want it to feel a little bit different. I want you to take what works in the first game and build on that. And I don't feel like they did that in this game, which was very disappointing. So I will give it a little bit a higher grade. It's still kind of in that B+ area, but it's not quite an A for me because they didn't, again, do that sequel thing where take what's great about the first game and then build on it. It just didn't do that. Like a game that we'll talk about later, Plague Tale Requiem definitely did that, and I'm definitely, I guess, spoiler alert, gonna give that a higher score because of that. So again, we're gonna talk about Elden Ring next. I don't know what else I can say about this game that I haven't already said in past videos or that hasn't already been said about this game. It is a phenomenal game. Yes, there is a difficulty to this game that is going to limit some people, but for the most part, this is a phenomenal game. It has just an amazing look to it. The art direction is breathtaking. I will say, and I've said this before and I'll say it a million other times, I think this game, it's not the biggest open world I've ever played, but it probably has bang for its buck better than any other game. Like there's more to do in this open world than I think I've ever experienced in my entire life. I've said this before about Elden Ring. I know I'm being very hyperbolic with this game, but I think it's definitely fitting. This is a once in a generation type of game. There is a generation of gamers that this will be their favorite game of all time. And I don't disagree with that. It's a phenomenal game. So just all of that being said, I feel like I almost have to give it an S rank, and it definitely deserves it. Elden Ring is a phenomenal game. So the next game I want to talk about is Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which I think it's ironic that this game is called The Forgotten Land because I legitimately forgot that I had played it, which is more funny because I literally reviewed it for this channel. It was one of the first reviews I did for this channel. And honestly, it's not necessarily a bad game. It just didn't stick with me because it didn't add anything more than I expected. It's just a solid Kirby game. It's a cute game. The platforming is a little bit easier than I wanted it to be, but that kind of makes sense because it's an established Nintendo IP and their games typically are geared more towards children, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just I'm not a child, so I thought the platforming was pretty easy, but it's a cute, fun game. It's just pretty forgettable. All right, so ultimately, I think I would give Kirby and the Forgotten Land a C rank, and the next two games, Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga and Evil Dead the game, I'm going to talk about them together, which I know is a weird pairing, but stay with me. I am a fan of both franchises. Star Wars is the GOAT for me. It is Mount Rushmore of my nerddom. And Evil Dead is one of the greatest horror movies of all time. So I am a fan of both franchises. However, the reason I'm talking about these two games together is both of them were just not my cup of tea. I think both of them are very good games. They just weren't for me. Not a big fan of the Lego games in general. I played the original Lego Batman game when it first came out, and it's a fun game. And the Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga is also a good game. They're just not for me, and that's fine. And Evil Dead, the game, I was so excited for because I think the idea of these horror multiplayer games like Dead by Daylight and Friday the 13th are really, really cool. I think it's such a cool idea, and they have a huge fan base. And I really wanted to play Dead by Daylight, but I feel like I just don't like being the guy that doesn't know how to play a game, especially a multiplayer game. And so I feel like at this point, I just couldn't jump back into that game. So I was super excited for Evil Dead because I was like, okay, well, here's an excuse to play this type of game day one. And I love the franchise. Unfortunately, played it day one and I couldn't get into it. So I think that's all she wrote for these types of games, at least for me. Again, Lego Star Wars and Evil Dead are both good games. They just weren't for me. So I'm going to give Skywalker Saga low B, and then Evil Dead a little bit higher than Kirby and the Forgotten Land. So the next game I want to talk about is a part of a franchise that, like Star Wars, I would put in my Mount Rushmore of my nerddom, which is a phrase that I made up earlier and now I'm just going with. And that is TMNT Shredder's Revenge. I absolutely adore this game. I love TMNT. I grew up with the franchise. It was actually the first TV show I remember being conscious of when it was on TV. When I was a young kid, I just watched whatever was on TV when it was on, and I didn't really know or care what things were scheduled to be on. I just watched whatever was on. TMNT changed that for me. I knew exactly when it was going to be on TV, and I was glued to the TV the whole time. And the franchise has really lent itself to video games really well. We've had the original arcade game, we had Turtles in Time, we had Manhattan Project, just to name a few. And I would put Shredder's Revenge in that same category of just phenomenal TMNT video games. I loved the old arcadey art style of this game. The soundtrack was next level. I loved the music in this game. The humor was also pitch perfect for the original cartoon, which I appreciated. And the multiplayer was surprisingly seamless. Now, I did play it the first weekend it came out, so I don't know, maybe it was just because there was a ton of people playing at the time that it made it so much easier to find people to play with. But anytime I wanted to play the multiplayer, I just loaded it up and it just was instantaneous, which I was definitely impressed with. And then the cherry on top was that it was a day one Game Pass game. So my only knock on Shredder's Revenge is it's pretty short. If I remember correctly, it came out on a Friday. I woke up early Saturday morning, downloaded it, beat it by Saturday afternoon. So it'll take you probably 5 to 7 hours to beat the entire game. Therefore, I can't put it up with Elden Ring in S tier, but I will put it up in A tier. The next game I want to talk about is the first DLC that I included in this list, and that is Cuphead, The Delicious Last Course, which if I was rating Cuphead on its own, it would be above Elden Ring in S tier. I absolutely love that game. It is one of my favorite games of all time, and I was super psyched for the DLC, but boy, did they make us wait a while for it. But it was definitely worth the wait. It was just more Cuphead. The bosses are great. I love the chef. And my only real complaint about the original game is the run and gun levels. I love platformers, and it's great platforming. It's not bad. It just, the thing that I truly love about Cuphead is the bosses, and the run and guns got to the point where it just kind of felt like it was homework. It was things that I had to do to get the gold coins. And the thing that I loved about Last Course was they did away with the run and guns, but instead they gave us the King of Games, and those were so much fun. So I didn't even think that they could improve upon Cuphead with the DLC. I just figured it was just going to be more of Cuphead, which would have been good enough by itself because Cuphead is so good, but they were able to even improve upon a fantastic game. So I'm not going to give Cuphead an A tier just because it isn't a full game. It's just a DLC, but it's going to be high B tier for me. The next game I want to talk about is a game I didn't know I needed until I played it, and that is Stray, which you probably already know. It's the game where you play as a cat, which is fun, but it actually was better than I expected. Yes, they nailed the experience of playing as a cat. You can knock shit off counters. You can at one point walk through paint and you leave your little paw prints all over the place, which I thought was a very cat thing to do. But it's also a really, really good platformer. It has a surprising like post-apocalyptic feel to it. I loved the story and the art style of this game, but also it kind of pulls a Last of Us to a lesser extent, mind you, but it really, really makes you care about the characters very early on in this game. I felt for this cat. I would die for this cat within like 10 minutes of playing this game. It is a really, really cool story and just a fun game to play. Like Shredder's Revenge, Stray is a shorter game, but I actually think it works well for this particular game because despite really enjoying it, I do feel like the gameplay would have wore out its welcome if it was any longer than it was. So I actually think the runtime of Stray actually works for it. And therefore, I'm going to give it an A tier as well. I do prefer TMNT Shredder's Revenge just because I am a big fan of the franchise, but they're both very good games. Speaking of TMNT, I've already talked about some of the older games that I really love in the franchise, and that's why I really wanted to talk about the Cowabunga collection. Even though they aren't new games in that collection, they're all just re-releases of older games. But I'm really digging playing this game because some of these games I didn't get to play when they first came out because I didn't have the system that it came out on. So I love that they've put all of these games in together. I bought it on my Switch, so I've been able to kind of play it as I have time to play it. It's not something that I've been like, when a new game comes out, I'm like, oh, I need to play it until I beat it. Cowabunga Collection, I've just kind of played more casually, and I love the packaging that these games come in. Like, they really did go above and beyond with some of the presentation for the collection, so I definitely have been enjoying it. I won't give it a super high tier just because they aren't new games, but I just think that they did a really good job with this collection. So I think I would put it, man, I think I'll put it below Arceus, but above Skywalker Saga. The Last of Us Part 1 remake was a game I was pretty excited for, especially considering it is one of my favorite games of all time, at least the original. I was a little bit annoyed with the $70 price tag, but it was a good excuse to replay one of my favorite games of all time. Now that I've played it, I will say that it is a blatant cash grab. Yeah, it's a phenomenal game, and I think everyone should play it before they die, but it's not worth the full price. It is a remake of a game that hasn't been out for that long, and they didn't do anything to actually justify the remake. It looks phenomenal on PlayStation 5, and it's a great game. Anyone that has never played it should definitely do it, but I would not pay full price for the remake. So this is definitely a controversial ranking, especially considering it is widely regarded one of the best video games of all time, and it is personally one of my favorite video games of all time. It is some of the best character development and one of the best stories ever told in video games. But I'm ranking the remake. I'm not ranking the game itself. And for me, the remake is one of my least favorite games that I played this year because I paid $70 for a game that wasn't any different than a game I paid $20 for the first remaster. I literally paid $20 for the PlayStation 4 remastered version of this game that also had the DLC, and it's basically the same game. Yes, it looks a lot nicer on the PlayStation 5, but that was not worth $70. So I'm going to give it an F tier. Keep in mind, before you start typing out your angry comments, I absolutely love the game. It is a phenomenal game, but it was not worth the $70. If you could have gotten this for 30 or 40 or even maybe even 50, it's in the C or B tier. Because again, it didn't really do a whole lot. The remake didn't really change a whole lot, but it's still a phenomenal game. It just didn't do anything to justify the price tag. And for me, that's always going to leave a sour taste in my mouth when I think about this game. The next game, Scorn, like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, is a game that I reviewed on this channel, so I'm going to be a little bit quick with my thoughts. If you want to hear my full review, definitely check out that particular video. Scorn isn't a game that I had super high expectations for. What I did see before I played the game, I thought was kind of interesting, and this game is very unique. It has a very interesting art style to it. The puzzles were really cool, and it has just a really creepy and interesting tone to it. Unfortunately, and I mentioned this in my full review, I just can't get over how frustrating the combat was. For most of this game, it was just absolutely horrendous combat. I will give it credit, the last level, especially a particular boss battle, which again, going back to what I've already talked about with my TMNT fandom, reminded me of Krang, that particular boss fight, which I definitely appreciated. But all in all, Scorn was very frustrating to play. And because of that, I just don't feel like I could give Scorn a high ranking. And honestly, based on the way that I've ranked these other games, I feel like Scorn has to slide in at D rank, which sucks because I think that it had the potential to be a very good game. Speaking of a good game, my next game is Plague Tale Requiem, which is another game that I did a full review on this channel, so be kind of quick with it. I loved Plague Tale Innocence, and Requiem did the sequel thing that I want, which is give me what I loved about the first game, but also build on it, because I don't want to just play more of the first game, because then that kind of gets boring. Yes, the first game was great, but I want a little bit more. I want something a little bit different. And this game definitely did that. And not only did it do that, but it also built on an already really good story and relationship. The two main characters are written so well in this game. I especially like that they added a little bit of levity between the characters, which kind of built that bond for me. So A Plague Tale Requiem is one of my favorite games of the year. And despite being a huge fan of TMNT, I actually think I'm going to put it above Shredder's Revenge. It is one of the best games I played this year. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is a game that I play a lot of, but if you watch this channel regularly, you would have no idea, because I think this is actually the first time I've ever brought it up. And that's honestly because this is the Madden of first-person shooters. We get a new Call of Duty game every year, and it's basically the same game, just in a different package. And that's fine. It's a first-person shooter. I don't really have a guilty pleasure because I'm not really embarrassed by anything that I like, but this would be close to a guilty pleasure for me, just because it's a Call of Duty game. It's just, there's not a whole lot to talk about. It's what you expect from a Call of Duty game. They have a ton of money, so they make really good looking games. It is well put together, but it's a Call of Duty game. It's just me and my buddy's excuse to stay in touch, and we like first person shooters. And so we play a lot of Call of Duty, but that's about it. If it wasn't for me and him playing together, I would have never bought this game. Therefore, I'm not going to give it a super high ranking. It's a Call of Duty game. It is what it is. It does exactly what you expect a Call of Duty game to do. And like I said, it's just kind of an excuse for me and my buddy to stay in touch. So, not one of my favorite games, but it's probably going to end up being the game out of all these that I play the most, just because we play it pretty much 3 or 4 times a week. So I'll end up putting in probably 300 to 400 hours into this game, a game that I'm just like lukewarm on. So that's pretty funny. Speaking of a game that I've put a lot of hours into, I'm going to talk about another DLC, and that is Resident Evil Village, the Winter's expansion, which included several things. They added some mercenary mode, which I never played because I'm not a big fan of mercenaries, but it also added a third-person view, which I loved because it was just an excuse for me to roll through the game again. And it also had a DLC, Shadows of Rose, which I thought was really cool. It's short, but it's really, really effective. I actually think that Shadows of Rose was actually scarier than the original game. There's a moment in this game where you're like tracked by these mannequins, and they're so creepy. So I really, really enjoyed it. Resident Evil Village is probably my favorite Resident Evil game, which is saying a lot because I'm a big fan of the franchise. I think it's a phenomenal game, and the Winter's expansion was a very, very good DLC. But again, like I said with Cuphead, I don't want to give it a like a full ranking because I'm not ranking the entire game. I'm just ranking the DLC. Oh man, I want to say Cuphead is a little bit better DLC. So I'm going to give Winter's Expansion a little bit of a downgrade, but they're both very, very good DLCs. So God of War Ragnarok was kind of neck and neck with Elden Ring for most people's game of the year. And honestly, now that I've played it, as much praise as I heaped on Elden Ring, well deserved, I personally think that God of War is better. I think I personally prefer God of War to Elden Ring. Elden Ring, all the things that I said about Elden Ring are 100% true. But I just love God of War. I just love that the original, I'm going to say the original, the 2018 God of War game is such a phenomenal game. And not only did this game do the sequel thing that I've already talked about, it added more exploration, it added more mechanics, there's some more boss battles, some really interesting side content. There's, without spoiling too much, there's some different combat in this game that I appreciated. You have some side characters kind of similar to Plague Tale Requiem, but the story, I didn't think they could do a better job than the 2018 game, and they managed to up the ante, and I didn't even think that was possible. So God of War Ragnarok is such a good game. It looks amazing on PlayStation 5. As much as I loved Elden Ring, and I again double down on everything I said earlier, it is a once in a generation type of game. It is a generation's favorite game of all time, but Ragnarok is just so good. It's so good. And I think that in a vacuum, Elden Ring is probably the bigger achievement in gaming, but I personally prefer Ragnarok. Somerville gave me serious inside vibes when I saw the promo material, and ultimately I couldn't help myself but be disappointed when it wasn't what I wanted it to be, which isn't really the game's fault, because Somerville is a fine game. It certainly helps that it was day one Game Pass game for me, so I didn't pay a cent for it outside of the subscription fee I pay for Game Pass. But it just wasn't what I wanted it to be, which again isn't the fault of the game, it's more of my expectations. But the platforming, the puzzles weren't that difficult. The story, while interesting, by the end of it, it left me with more questions than answers, which can be fun depending on what I'm playing. But for the most part, my personal preference is, if I'm putting several hours into your game, I want you to tell me the story that you're telling me. Don't make me do some of the heavy lifting for the story. Don't make me do mental gymnastics to try to figure out, to put the puzzle pieces together. That's not what I want in my video games. So that was kind of annoying. I will give it credit. It did remind me a lot of Arrival, which is a movie that I really dig, especially the ending I thought was kind of interesting. But for the most part, because again, it's not the fault of the game, but because I had inside expectations for this game and it ultimately wasn't that good, I left with a sour taste in my mouth. I think I'll put Somerville right after Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which is ironic because I think those are both games that I will forget I even played in a year from now. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is a game that I've purposely been avoiding talking about on this channel because I've been saving it for this video. I'm a huge fan of the franchise and I have a lot of thoughts. And unfortunately, being a big fan of the franchise, it pains me to say that this is an objectively bad game, which sucks because I do appreciate that they are at least trying to push the franchise forward. I've complained for years that the Pokemon games just feel like carbon copies of each other. And so I definitely appreciate that they're trying to give us a true open world game. Unfortunately, you just have to do better than this. There has to be a better version of a open world Pokemon game than this game. I don't know if I've played an open world game where things have rendered in front of me more than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And even when they did render, everything just looks objectively ugly in this game. There's no way around it. It just looks bad. And they really don't have much of an excuse because yes, it's an open world game, but you're not even putting the full Pokedex in this game. And also, there are games on the Switch that look good. There are even open world games on the Switch that look good. Hell, Breath of the Wild was an open world game that was a launch title for the Switch that looks better than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. To their credit, the open world aspect of this game is really fun. I do like that you can do whatever you want when you want to do it. I do like that there's more than just getting the badges. I will say that the Elite Four and the Champion in this game are an absolute joke. I was one-shotting most of them. The Champion is a terrible battler. She has absolutely no sense of how to sequence her team. It was an absolute joke. But the open world stuff was fun, and I am playing this game. I'm still doing a lot of post-game stuff with this game, but that is more about me, more about Pokemon being a drug that I can't kick than the actual game itself. Because again, I do think that this game is objectively bad. So naturally you would assume that this should be F tier, but I am still enjoying the game. I still like that it's open world. I still love playing Pokemon games. I'm always gonna play the new Pokemon game when it comes out. I'm the sucker that will continue to buy these games even if they're bad. And I'm still enjoying it somewhat. I wish it was better, but I'm still enjoying it because I still enjoy Pokemon. So I can't give it F tier like I did with The Last of Us Part 1. So I think that I'm going to put it right below Modern Warfare 2. Even though, for me, it pains me to say that a Call of Duty game is better than a new Pokemon game, but that's where we're at right now. All right, so the last few, I'm going to kind of do rapid fire. This video is taking longer than I thought it would. So the last 3 games, 2 of which I've already reviewed on this channel. So if you want my full thoughts, definitely check out those videos. We have the Callisto Protocol, High on Life, and the next gen update of Witcher. The Witcher 3, I should say. So the Callisto Protocol, it feels really weird that I'm talking about this game right after Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but the Callisto Protocol is like the polar opposite of Scarlet and Violet because it looks amazing. PlayStation 5, this game was made for that new console. It looks absolutely breathtaking. The facial rendering in this game is just the best I've ever seen it. So it was fun to play. Unfortunately, the combat left much to be desired. I enjoyed the kind of like the weird dodge and then strike system, but once you got the hang of it, it made the game really easy, and it gets kind of annoying, especially when there's more than one enemy. Like, they didn't fine tune it. Like, it's really cool when it's one-on-one, but when you have more than one enemy, it gets really, really frustrating. So I think I would give Callisto Protocol, I think I would be higher than Modern Warfare 2, even though I do think that has its serious flaws, but I'm really, really excited for the Dead Space remake. High on Life was a really fun first-person shooter. It had a lot of jokes that I like. I like that type of humor. I do think that if you don't particularly like that type of humor, you're probably not going to like this game. I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, I think that if you like Justin Roiland, you like his brand of comedy, you're going to enjoy this game. Otherwise, it's just kind of your typical first-person shooter. So it's going to also go in that same category or the same area. I'm going to put it above... Oh man, I'm having a hard time with this. My love for Pokemon is really... I'm like struggling with it. I think I'll put it after Pokemon. And then the next gen update of Witcher 3. I mean, it's one of the best RPGs of all time, but like I did with the DLCs, like I did with The Last of Us Part 1, I want to talk about it. I'm not talking about this particular game. I'm talking about the next gen update. So the game itself is amazing. I keep hitting my mic. I talk with my hands too much. So I apologize for that. The next gen update is a cool excuse for me to run through this game again. I personally don't think they added a ton. It's not going to blow you away, but it was a free update to a game that I love. So I'm definitely all for it. I would probably put it in B tier. Maybe I think I would put it right here. I think this is a good spot for it. Well, there you have it, folks. Those are my rankings for every 2022 video game that I played. I hope that you enjoyed the video. It's a little bit longer than my normal content, so if you've made it this far, I definitely appreciate if you smash that like button, as the kids say. That just kind of helps push this video out to other people. And since this is my first video of 2023, I do want to wish everybody a happy new year, but I also want to thank everybody that stopped in over the course of this past year. I started this channel, I think like 2 years ago, but I didn't really have a plan or a purpose. It wasn't until 2022 that I finally got that itch to consistently create content, and I've been really enjoying it. And so I would just ask that you hit that subscribe button, ding that bell, because I did make a New Year's resolution to prioritize this channel. So I'm going to be putting out a lot of content in 2023. And in order for you to make sure that you don't miss it, you got to be subscribed. You got to ding that bell. But all that being said, until next time, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?